A few years ago, the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia had almost nothing on it. Today, that same stretch of desert is turning into a city so huge and so expensive that it barely seems real. Parts of it are already up and running, the cables are live, and the sand is crowded with crews working around the clock. But the rise of this mega project isn't just a Saudi story. Somehow, China has become a key part of it. Inside Saudi Arabia's new desert megacity, out in the far northwest corner of Saudi Arabia, there is a strip of desert that used to be nothing special. It sits along the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba across from Egypt and just below Jordan. For decades, it was mostly sand, rock, and a few scattered towns. Today, that same strip has something new running through it. Fresh roads, buried cables, worker camps, and a control room full of glowing screens that watch a project the size of a small country. That project is called NEOM. NEOM is not a single tower or a single street. It is a whole region that Saudi Arabia wants to turn into a new kind of city. It covers about 26,500 square kilometers, which is a little over 10,000 square miles, so it is almost as big as a small European country. Inside that huge stretch of land, NEOM plans to build three main zones: the Line, Oxagon, and Trojena, all surrounded by a wide nature reserve and tourism areas that cover the rest of the land. The Line is meant to be a long, thin city stretching inland from the Red Sea. Homes, offices, shops, parks, and trains would be stacked in layers, so people can walk to most things they need and use fast public transit when they have to go farther. Oxagon is the industrial and shipping part on the coast, built around an existing port that has been renamed the Port of NEOM. It is supposed to hold factories, research centers, and clean energy plants. Trojena is the mountain escape in the nearby highlands with lakes, hiking areas, and an outdoor ski slope, and it has already been picked to host a future Asian Winter Games. To understand why anyone would pour so much money into a patch of empty desert, you have to step back to a plan called Vision 2030. Saudi leaders decided they could not rely on oil money forever. Vision 2030 is their roadmap for building other ways to make money, like tourism, shipping, clean energy, and tech. NEOM is one of the biggest pieces of that plan and is often described as its main future city. It is meant to show investors and visitors that Saudi Arabia can be a place of labs, resorts, and data centers, not just oil fields. Over the last decade, banks and property analysts have tried to estimate how much Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 projects might cost. According to groups like Knight Frank and Bloomberg, when you add everything together, the total comes to about $1.3 trillion, with NEOM as the biggest part of it. For NEOM alone, officials spent years saying it would cost around $500 billion. Even that would make it one of the most expensive projects on Earth. But newer audits, leaked documents, and outside studies show the price could be far higher. Some long-term estimates say the full build could reach about $1 trillion or more. The basic nervous system of the region has already been switched on, and some parts of it now function in the real world. One part of that nervous system is the digital backbone. Saudi telecom companies and NEOM's own tech team have spent the last few years putting fiber optic lines in the ground, connecting new subsea cables in the Red Sea, and building cell towers. All of this is to make sure fast mobile internet and private networks cover the new roads, the port areas, and the worker camps being set up. On top of the cables and cell towers, NEOM has started adding what it calls a cognitive city layer. That simply means using powerful computers and smart software to track and manage as much of the city as possible. Autonomous, which is NEOM's tech arm, is working with Oracle to place a cloud center inside NEOM and with NVIDIA to bring in advanced chips for artificial intelligence. These chips also power a digital twin, which is just a live computer copy of the city. It shows where energy, water, traffic, and people are moving in real time. The goal is for this system to help run traffic lights, cooling systems, security cameras, and even delivery robots in a more automatic way than in normal cities. The clearest sign that NEOM has moved from computer slides to real life is Sindala. This island is less than 1 square mile, but it has become NEOM's first real preview site. It sits a few miles off the northwest coast, in clear Red Sea water full of coral. In late October of 2024, NEOM held a huge opening party there. 65 superyachts showed up, along with famous singers and actors, and the event alone cost tens of millions of dollars. The island's budget has risen to almost $4 billion, about 3 times the first estimate, and it opened roughly 3 years later than planned. On paper, Sindala is supposed to have hundreds of hotel rooms and apartments, a golf course, and many yacht berths. In reality, by early and mid-2025, reporters found that most of the island was still unfinished. Many rooms were not ready, and bookings for normal visitors kept getting delayed. Saudi officials later moved Sindala's day-to-day management away from the NEOM team and handed it to Red Sea Global, a state developer that already runs luxury resorts nearby. Satellite photos and contractor updates now show clusters of worker housing, basically small construction towns, along with new roads and utility lines stretching deep into the sand. Some of these worker camps can hold many thousands of people. They have clinics, dining halls, and recreation areas, all built from modular units that can be moved later. It is also important to be honest about how far things have actually come. NEOM was first advertised as something that would have major parts ready in the early 2020s and a much larger share ready by the year 2030. Those targets have slipped. Parts of NEOM, especially the line, have been scaled back and broken into smaller phases because of high costs. Instead of building the entire length at once, planners are focusing on shorter sections tied to key events, such as a new stadium zone near the coast that could be finished in time for big sports tournaments. Saudi leaders no longer see NEOM as a fast project that fits into a single decade. Inside the country, people now talk about NEOM as a 50-year plan, with different parts rising or falling in priority depending on the budget, oil prices, and long-term national goals. To understand whether this place can ever work the way its planners promise, you have to look past the control rooms and the beach events and study the hidden systems, the walls, tunnels, and deep infrastructure that are supposed to keep millions of people alive and moving in extreme heat. How this desert megacity actually works. The line will run a little more than 100 miles from the Red Sea into the desert. It is only supposed to be about 650 feet wide and around 1,640 feet tall, like a giant glass wall lying across the sand. On that narrow strip, planners say the city could hold up to about 9 million people by stacking homes and services in layers, instead of spreading them out like a normal city. There are no private cars and no regular streets in the plan. A high-speed train is meant to run from one end to the other in about 20 minutes. Shops, clinics, and schools are supposed to sit close enough that almost everyone can walk to daily needs in about 5 minutes. To make that work, the whole city is stacked in layers. The top layer is the world people see and walk through. Parks, homes, offices, and terraces where you can step outside without seeing a single car. Under that is a hidden service layer where freight carts, robots, maintenance teams, and hidden support systems move around without blocking the spaces above. At the very bottom sits the heavy layer, fast passenger trains, freight lines, and the main pipes and cables that move power, water, and data from one end of the city to the other. The simple idea is to keep people, goods, and utilities in separate lanes so they do not get in each other's way, and to leave almost all the land outside the strip as open nature instead of turning it into suburbs and highways. That picture only works if this wall city can stay solid in sand and rock for decades. For that, engineers have started with very deep foundations, far beyond what a normal house or mall would ever need. One major contractor said they drilled test piles more than 330 feet deep, and each one was filled with a steel cage that weighed about 110,000 pounds. You can think of these piles like a buried forest of giant columns. Instead of relying on one thick slab under the whole structure, Many deep columns spread out the weight and make it much harder for the wall to tilt, crack, or sink unevenly over time. Under the path of the future buildings, a whole network of tunnels is taking shape. In the rocky inland areas, crews have already bored twin rail tunnels through the mountains for the first part of the line, using tunnel boring machines to cut tubes about 17 miles long. The rock they pull out is crushed and reused in concrete and other building materials, so the desert becomes both the worksite and the source of supplies. These buried corridors keep heavy traffic and noisy equipment off the surface and give engineers a safe route for pipes and cables in a region that can jump from extreme heat to sudden flash floods. Above ground, the shape of the city is meant to do as much climate work as possible before the air conditioning turns on. Official plans describe the line as having an ideal climate all year round. The narrow gap between the two mirrored walls is meant to block harsh sunlight for most of the day and break up strong desert winds. By controlling how air flows in and out at the top and bottom, and by filling terraces with trees and plants, designers hope to set up a steady movement of cooler air through the canyon-like space between the walls. The goal is not to avoid air conditioning completely, but to shape the building so each degree of cooling uses less energy than in a normal glass tower standing alone in full sun. Behind that design, there is still a lot of heavy cooling hardware. Instead of giving each building its own air conditioning system, NEOM plans to use large district cooling plants. These plants chill water in one place and pump it through pipes into clusters of buildings. Inside, that chilled water absorbs heat from apartments, offices, and transit spaces, then returns to be cooled again. The same shared system is meant to cool data centers, server rooms, and the sealed train stations deep inside the structure, all of which produce a lot of heat that has to be removed. All of this depends on steady power. NEOM's utility company, Inawa, has promised that the region will run on 100% renewable energy. The backbone of that promise is a group of very large power links that use high-voltage direct current. These are power lines that send electricity in one steady direction instead of in a back-and-forth wave. That makes them better at moving power over long distances with less loss than normal lines. Signed deals already cover 3 of these high-voltage links with a total capacity of up to about 9 gigawatts, similar to several large conventional power plants. One of the first power links is planned to run from the industrial zone on the coast to older power hubs near Yanbu, over a distance of more than 370 miles. This lets extra wind and solar power flow in either direction whenever it is needed. On top of this grid sits one of the most ambitious pieces of hardware in the whole project, the NEOM Green Hydrogen plant at Oxagon. A joint company is building this complex to use about 4 gigawatts of dedicated wind and solar power to feed huge electrolyzer units. These machines split water into hydrogen and oxygen using electricity. Once fully running, the plant is expected to make around 600 tons of hydrogen each day, turn that into about 1.2 million tons of ammonia every year, and export most of it as a clean fuel. The total investment in this single facility is about $8.4 billion. Progress reports in the middle of 2025 said construction across the wind farm, solar park, and chemical plant was roughly 80% complete. Simply put, this plant acts like a giant chemical battery for the city. When the sun is bright and the wind is strong, spare electricity can be used to make hydrogen. Later, that hydrogen can be turned back into power, burned as a fuel, or shipped away as ammonia to earn money. For people living in the line, that means part of their energy system lives not just in wires and transformers, but also in tanks, pipes, and export ships down at the coast. Water is another part of the machine that has to be built almost from nothing. There are no big rivers in this part of the desert, so almost every gallon that reaches a tap will start as seawater. Inawa has signed deals to build large desalination plants at Oxagon that run only on renewable power. One flagship design is a selective desalination plant that uses special membranes to pull fresh water out of seawater while separating different kinds of salt in the leftover brine. The first of these plants was planned to send treated water into the system around the middle of the decade to supply homes, factories, and hotels. Instead of dumping the salty waste straight back into the Red Sea, NOAA talks about a zero liquid discharge model. That means putting the leftover brine through extra steps until almost all the water has been recovered, and what remains is a thick mix of minerals that can be turned into useful products. NEOM's water research teams have already shown membrane systems that can pull out high-purity salts and other minerals from seawater brine, and they are testing ways to use that brine in concrete mixes too. The long-term hope is a loop where seawater comes in, clean water goes to homes and industry, and almost no liquid waste is thrown away. The reuse idea continues past drinking water. NEOM's official plans include a network of water recycling plants and smart sewage pipes across the region. The goal is to collect every drop of wastewater from homes and businesses, treat it, and reuse it for things like irrigation, landscaping, and some construction work. Current designs call for hundreds of miles of freshwater pipes and more than 1,500 miles of sewage and recycled water lines, along with treatment plants built to handle about 66 million gallons of wastewater each day. The last piece of the puzzle is who is actually building all of this. When you look at the cranes, the tunnel boring crews, and the companies competing for power and water contracts, you keep seeing the same major players from far to the east. How China got pulled into Saudi Arabia's megacity. For years, the connection between China and Saudi Arabia was mainly crude oil. China is Saudi Arabia's biggest trading partner, and Saudi Arabia is usually either the first or second biggest supplier of oil to China, sending tens of millions of tons of crude each year. That steady flow of oil money built trust and a habit of doing business long before anyone talked about a future city in the desert. Then the politics shifted upward. In the middle of the last decade, Riyadh and Beijing agreed on a comprehensive strategic partnership, which basically means the two sides plan to work together for the long run, not just trade oil. In late 2022, China's president visited Riyadh for major meetings with Saudi and Arab leaders. During that trip, Saudi and Chinese companies signed around 34 agreements covering green energy, hydrogen, cloud computing, transport, housing, and construction. One deal tied Saudi Arabia's main economic plan to China's Belt and Road program. Another gave Huawei a role in cloud services and high-tech parks inside the kingdom. The money came quickly after that. By 2023, China had become the biggest source of greenfield investment in Saudi Arabia, the kind where companies build new factories and plants from the ground up. Chinese greenfield projects in Saudi Arabia reached about $16.8 billion that year, more than 10 times the year before. That was more than half of all new business investment entering the kingdom. A big share of that money flowed into clean energy, batteries, solar hardware, and other technology that lines up directly with what NEOM needs. The first major Chinese imprint sits under the sand. NEOM has broken the line's underground work into big tunnel jobs. In the mountain sections, teams from China, Spain, and Saudi Arabia are drilling long tunnels so trains, freight, and waste can move below the surface. Another Chinese company has been building the access tunnels and entrance points and has already finished several of them. In simple terms, Chinese crews are building many of the tunnels that let the long city operate at all. Chinese companies also play a major role in testing the foundations. Power China has drilled some of the deepest test piles in the coastal area and filled them with huge steel cages and strong concrete to see how the ground behaves under massive weight. The idea is simple. Before anyone builds tall mirrored walls on soft sand, the ground has to be tested to its limits. A Chinese contractor is one of the groups trusted to run those tests. Around these test sites, you also see Chinese machines everywhere. Sany, a major Chinese maker of cranes and excavators, has sent more than 1,000 machines to NEOM. They lift steel cages, pump concrete, and handle the early groundwork. Reports say these machines have already worked tens of thousands of hours. Another Chinese company, Sumec, has supplied large diesel generators to power worker camps, site offices, and early construction areas before the main grid and renewable energy are fully ready. China also shows up in the energy systems. A Chinese company called SunGrow is supplying a huge battery of about 400 megawatt-hours and key inverters for one of NEOM's main renewable zones linked to the hydrogen plant. A battery this large helps smooth out the grid. It stores extra energy when the sun and wind are strong and releases it when they are weak. Another Chinese group, Far East Horizon, is providing dozens of large wind turbines for NEOM's coastal industrial zone and hydrogen projects. The digital side also has strong Chinese support. During the 2022 meetings in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia signed a deal with Huawei to work on cloud computing and smart tech zones inside the kingdom. Huawei has since opened a cloud data center in Riyadh that supports government systems, Arabic language artificial intelligence, and other online services. It is not labeled as part of NEOM, but it shows how Chinese tech firms are becoming part of Saudi Arabia's digital plans. NEOM's supplier lists also include Chinese companies like Envision, which help with clean energy and smart grid systems. While Chinese engineers work on site, NEOM's leaders have been traveling in China. In early 2024, they held a Discover NEOM tour in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. The final event in Hong Kong was organized with the city's Belt and Road Office. At a museum in West Kowloon, Saudi officials showed Chinese investors large models and screens of the Line, Oxagon, Trojena, and Sindala. The message was clear: Chinese money and Chinese technology are welcome. For China, this fits its new version of the Belt and Road, which now focuses more on clean energy, digital systems, and advanced manufacturing rather than just ports and basic railways. Analysts say Saudi Arabia has become one of the top places worldwide for new Chinese clean tech factories, with more than one-third of that money going into batteries, solar, wind, and similar sectors. A huge desert city that wants to run on renewables and automation is the perfect place for China to show this new image. For Saudi Arabia, the benefits are practical. Chinese companies build railways, dams, and skyscrapers quickly and often at lower cost than Western groups. Bringing Chinese builders into tunnels, foundations, turbines, and solar hardware creates more competition and lowers prices, while still leaving space for American and European firms in other parts of the project. For China, NEOM is more than a customer. If the tunnel work, foundation work, energy systems, and smart grids succeed, that could lead to decades of contracts and long-term influence. It also strengthens China's ties with a major Gulf country that links Asia, Europe, and Africa. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.